this up. All right, Denise McAllister is my guest. Thank you for your time, Denise. It's been a while. For those who don't know who you are, maybe you could just take a brief moment to tell us who you are and what you're all about. There's a description up here as far as to the books you've written. You're the author of, is it Real Romans?
I'm the author of books. I'm the author of What Men Want to Say to Women But Can't. I'm co-author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. I wrote that with Dan Bongino. I'm a publisher of a new website called Romans1.com, and the podcast there. I'm a host of the podcast Romans 1, which takes Christian principles and applies them and looks at current events and interprets them through scripture and biblical truth and objective truth. And so it's an analysis of politics and cultural events from that point of view. That's pretty much what I'm doing today. And just continuing to do writing. I'm starting a new book on sexuality and sexual identity. I've written a chapter in a new book that's coming out on the church and state. That was also about sexual identity. So I just cultural commentator, written for a variety of online magazines. People may know The Federalist and Daily Wire and PJ Media and others. And been on tons of radio programs, BBC and NPR. Been over on Fox News and CNN, Sean Hannity and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of different platforms, just doing cultural commentary and political commentary. But I'm mainly focused on religious, cultural, political commentary now.
Don't forget Milo. That was a great session you had with him. I know you're really fond of him, and I go back and forth on him. I take him in short bursts, I think.
Yeah, I was interviewed on his show once. Yeah, he's great to interview with. We get along quite well on interviewing. So
no, he's
an interesting character. He's
yeah,
very smart.
Yeah, no, he's highly intelligent and funny too. The way he kind of frames his arguments as well. I appreciate it because it's, well, I don't know if it's, you want to get the take of a gay man sometimes, you know what I mean? Especially with the left gone so wacky, and that's why I kind of want to hit on. I feel like I kind of wasted the resource with you last time because we only just talked a little bit about cancel culture, how it happens on the right, and now Michelle Malkin is screaming from the rooftops. I think I don't know if I'm just hearing her more now or what, but I don't know what's kind of triggered her to come so hard against, the likes of Con Inc., and which, she did a video on Ben Shapiro the other day. So I kind of feel like I talked to you over a year ago and we kind of danced around it a little bit, but you had full knowledge of it then and we didn't really delve into it. So how do you see this all playing out, and what do we got to do? Is there any way, or does it really matter that the right seems to be divided now between, I don't know. When Michelle was sticking up for the Groypers the other day, she couched, why do we always have to say, I don't agree with everything they say, but deplatforming them's wrong. So how do you see how this is playing out on the right as far as cancel culture or deplatforming?
Well, it's been going on for a while. I mean, people who aren't familiar with Michelle's situation, when she started doing some work with America First, which has been labeled an anti-Semitic organization because of some comments by its founder, Nick Fuentes. I'm not going to get into validating or not validating that. I think that he has a lot of humor that people have misunderstood and taken as opinion and him exerting some kind of fact. But regardless, it doesn't matter. The organization has a lot of good points to it as far as dealing with immigration and being concerned about the transformation of America from its founding principles, particularly its Christian foundational principles. And so Michelle works with them, has supported them, has spoken at their events in order to encourage that messaging, obviously none of the bad messaging. Well, when she did, she was immediately called out by Ben Shapiro, who basically called for her deplatforming and removing her because of her association with America First. And then she was uninvited by the YAF. It's the Young Americans Foundation.
Right.
It's associated with Turning Point USA, Charlie Cook Kirk and all of that crowd, disinvited her from speaking at any of their events. She was also removed and kicked out and banned from Fox News. So because of mere association, not stepping back to see how much that Michelle Malkin, through many decades, even before these young pups like Ben Shapiro were crawling out of their diapers, was doing a whole lot of wonderful work for conservatism, and has consistently been a strong Christian woman, a Christian voice, a conservative voice that's been foundational to our politics. Despite this fact, simply because she associated and aligned with an unacceptable, quote unquote, group that was deemed unacceptable by the in-group among the conservative elite, media elite, she has been basically silenced, banned, deplatformed, lost income. And so she talked a lot about it when it happened. It happened also with me. I was deplatformed because I offended a gay liberal who had falsely accused my husband of abuse. And then I was deluged by his minions with threats of police phone calls and social service intervention, saying that my husband was abusing me when he wasn't. And so I basically yelled at him on Twitter and said something that was actually true, but it wasn't said very nicely. And I was immediately deplatformed by Ben Shapiro, Daily Wire, The Federalist, PJ Media. I was also banned from Fox News. So despite the fact, like Michelle, I've been a voice for conservatism for years. I, definitely have my cred in being able to promote conservative values and principles and been a strong voice in that. But because of one thing that offended a sacred cow, both among libertarians and pseudo-conservatives and those on the left, I was deplatformed. And, this is pretty much, that's not the only example. There's others. Alex Jones and Milo is another example of deplatforming that was very much generated by the right against him. So Ben Shapiro was also, this is why Milo calls Ben Shapiro the poison dwarf. He's just a real problem. And when it comes to maneuvering for the deplatforming of people on the right, Tucker Carlson. And then among all that, when that happened to me and also happened to Michelle, but I can only speak to my situation, there was no support. There was a much applauding, I should say, by many, many conservatives on the right for my deplatforming, and actual calls and writing for my deplatforming, and behind the scenes commentary about my deplatforming. Tucker Carlson himself was very, supportive of my deplatforming and said some pretty nasty things about me. So it's just this kind of, I know it sounds very high school, it sounds very tit for tat, it sounds very nasty, but it's actually very serious when you start deplatforming people because they don't fit into a certain group or because they offend you because of some kind of PC thing. You're acting just like the left. You're using the same tools and weapons of the left to go after your own. And then the reason why you're hearing about it more now is because the left is actually getting more and more active in deplatforming during this time, with tribalism on the rise and everything. So as that's happening more and more, you're having people on the right, people like Ben Shapiro, who are themselves being attacked by the left, saying, we're not for cancel culture, we're against this, we're against deplatforming. This is only something the left does. And, Michelle and I and others are going, whoa, that's actually not true. You're very supportive of deplatforming. It just depends on who it is and what what it is that you're offended by. And our message is that no one should be deplatformed, for offending the PC mindset that goes on around. We should have freedom of speech. And what I mean by freedom of speech, I don't mean that legally, because private organizations like YAF that canceled Michelle, they don't have to hire people. What we're talking about, though, is that when you get into the practice of silencing in the public square each other for these kind of reasons, it can easily in the future move into a legal action. And so you're building and creating a culture of silencing, and so that people become tolerant of it, and then at some point look to governing authorities to do it for them. So if you don't nip this kind of thing in the bud in the public sphere, in this kind of attitude, then you're on a trajectory to loss of freedom, loss of free speech. It's also dangerous because you're labeling certain individuals simply because you've pushed them into a group that you have deemed unacceptable. You've stigmatized them and delegitimized them. This is pure leftist, Marxist, Stalinist tactics in order to delegitimize. The scary end of that, of course, is scapegoating, the kind of thing that leads to violence against people who you don't agree with. So the trajectory of this kind of behavior is wrong. And when the right does it, it silences those of us, but it also really encourages that kind of leftist mindset and empowers the very people that they think that they're fighting. So when Ben Shapiro, for example, deplatforms me because I offended a liberal gay guy, he's encouraging and empowering the left in its canceling and deplatforming anyone who opposes the LGBT agenda. He's setting himself in the place along with the leftists who are doing damage to our culture. And that's just one example. It can be other PC darlings and sacred cows, whatever it is that you're being deplatformed for. So that's kind of what's going on. That's what has Michelle upset. And for these guys to come out and play all innocent and victim and like, oh, woe is us, we would never do this to anybody. No, you do, and you need to stop because it's destroying the conservative power movement in order to make a difference in this nation.
I think you hit it right on the head there as far as, it's causing division, which is bad. And I love your comments about the faux conservatives. I think I'm a little naive to this because I just came around to, I used to be addicted to Canadian politics, both municipally, regionally, provincially, and federally, and now I can't take my eyes off Trump and the American politics. I've learned more about how the American system works because I was just never into it. I've run 10 elections up in Canada. I was just never interested in American politics, and since Trump, I can't look away. So when, part of my red pilling involved guys like Steven Crowder, Gavin McInnes, Jordan Peterson, and Ben Shapiro, and so. I'm interested in your thoughts on faux conservatism because, I feel like the voice needs to be united. And when it comes to Con Inc., whether it's Shapiro or Charlie Kirk, again, the last time I saw Michelle Malkin on YAF or with Charlie Kirk's, I don't know where her message was fire, like absolute. Like she was saying the quiet parts, she was screaming quiet parts, which I really enjoy. And so because I've got a fondness for my wokeism, coming right from my far left, I wasn't an activist, but I ran for the Green Party. I mean, it doesn't get more left than that. And I still kind of see myself as a, take care of people, when it comes to social stuff, I still land on the left. But what do you think it is with Con Inc? Is it just the money? Whether it's Charlie Kirk's group or these are bright guys. They got to see. I mean, I found Shapiro to be pretty objective on most issues other than Israel and maybe this topic. But, where does the cancel culture come from? Is it just bottom line dollars because they're going to lose sponsorship and they figure if they support someone like you or you don't disavow, the Groypers or what is it, America First? Yeah, and Nick Fuentes, I don't know him. I haven't studied him. He was clearly joking about the ovens and stuff. This is, how can you take a joke that far out of context? Is there no room for humor anymore on the right either? Because, I'm on the right now because the left doesn't stand for freedom of speech anymore. It doesn't stand for protection of your family. It doesn't stand for, biological sex being, unchangeable. And so, the things that matter to me most are the things that the left has literally abandoned. Like back in the day, the left was, free speech, peace, marijuana, no war, all this kind of stuff all sounds good. But now they're so ideologically possessed, I can't identify with them. I used to call myself a feminist. I can't put myself in that group anymore because of who the feminists have become. And I don't think that there was a time where You know, when I ran for the Green Party, the left needed a voice in 1993 because there was a lot of left issues that weren't getting attention. At some point, the women needed to be advocated for. I don't think that's such the case anymore. I mean, we don't have laws that oppress women or minorities anymore. So what do you think it is about Con Inc. that it's got them, running scared, really? Is it just the checks? Is it just the sponsors? Is that all they're protecting? Is their pockets?
I think it's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, we need to realize that when we're in the political sphere like we are, conservatism as it is today has been just a few steps behind the trajectory of liberalism. So it's not any kind of purist movement anymore. They really have not been founded on solid principles for a while. So let me put that aside because that's a little convoluted. The two big things of that's driving the conservative Inc. cancel culture is one, basic in-group dynamics that have affected the millennial mindset. And most of the people who are in these positions that are doing the counseling are either older millennials, young Gen Xers, or just millennials. And so they're really saturated with the mindset of do not offend. And they will offend on some things, and obviously we hear it. I mean, Ben Shapiro does it daily. But there are certain things within this group that they run from, and they still really run from the racism and the homophobia labels. They really do, and the misogyny to a degree. So they're a lot more sensitive to being labeled a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or a woman hater than older conservatives. Older conservatives like me, I don't care what you call me. I don't care what you think I am, whatever. And I don't care if I'm cast out of every group under the sun because you think I'm a racist or a bigot or whatever. They don't have that attitude. And that attitude is both financial and personal and relational. They're very group cliquish. They need their group. They don't like having their friends upset with them. There's a whole lot more of a personal element here than people realize. You offended a friend of mine. They have friends, and so that they don't want to have their friends mad at them. So they don't want to be associated with anyone that will offend their friends. This actually does still even affect those who are the big people speaking out. They still go to the cocktail parties. They still have their little groups that they hang out with. They still have their buddies and their little cliques in the media. They just do. I'm sorry to tell you all that, but they do. But overriding that is very much the dollar. These people are in million dollars or big business. They make a lot of money, and they are emboldened to speak by money. But they're also held in bondage by money. They have investors that they have to be accountable to. Most of these investors are libertarians, not conservatives. That makes a huge difference. A lot of the money bags that support the conservative movement are not conservative. That is a huge problem. I can't impress upon you how much of a problem that is. When you have your entire platform, your brand, your name, everything tied to reliance on funding that comes from people who fundamentally are not conservative, you're going to compromise along the way. And so when I was fired, when I was let go, whatever, pushed out by Ben Shapiro, I wasn't on staff there. He said 5 times in the email to me, I have to protect my brand. I have to protect the brand.
Yeah.
What was more concerning to him was protecting his money and his name and his investors than standing up for a conservative principle. Now, I know that the tweet that I sent to this liberal guy was mean, but that wasn't why I was being deplatformed. It wasn't because I was mean. We're all mean on Twitter. Ben Shapiro has been mean. People have said asshole before. I mean, that's what was in my tweet. That wasn't why. It was because I had defended a liberal gay guy, and it was deemed homophobic by certain groups. And because of that, he could not be associated with me and have my name associated with his brand. And the reason I know why was, one, he didn't want to have his friends think bad of him in his little group, but more importantly, he didn't want to lose his funding. I don't think he would have lost his funding if I'd kept writing. I think if he had just ignored it and I'd ignored it and everybody else ignored it, it just would have been a liberal hoo-ha, and then we would have moved on. But he didn't think so. He thought he would lose funding, as did the Federalist, now the Federalist recently has told me that they actually didn't fire me, that it was a misunderstanding.
Oh, yeah,
so I'm just going to throw that out right there. I'll take them at their word, but that wasn't how I saw it. And they said, well, we thought you quit. And I'm like, well, I didn't quit. You didn't fire me. So I guess I'm still a writer at the Federalist. I don't know. Anyway, that was very recently that I found that out. The point is that they were all concerned about funding and about saving the brand, saving themselves, saving their professional career. It was more important than standing by a fellow conservative who was being attacked by the left and may have said something or was associated, in Michelle's case, associated with a group that you weren't 100% behind. And so their choice was to deplatform. And now Ben Shapiro just said, get out of my Daily Wire business. And of course he has the right to do that. Mm-hmm. I want to make that clear. All of these groups have the right to let go people, whoever they want. That's not the point of cancel culture. It isn't about whether they have the right to fire. It's about why they're doing it. And, what are they supporting in doing it? And in doing that, what they're doing is empowering the cancel culture, empowering this PC mindset of attacking free speech. And in the name, as people who they themselves say that they uphold free speech. I mean, who hasn't talked about free speech more than Shapiro and people at the Federalist and people at Daily Wire and YAF and Turning Point USA, and yet they'll turn around and as soon as their funding is threatened because someone has said something that might offend someone in their in-group, embarrass them in some way, or threaten their funding, they're going to deplatform you. And in some cases, call for other groups to deplatform you. That's when it gets really nasty, is behind the scenes when this whole network says, not only are we going to let her go, but you all need to let her go too. And that's really evil. That's when you really get into silencing and stigmatizing, so that these people can't even get jobs, or they lose money, they can't sell, their writings or whatever it is, they can't get on speaking platforms. And it's very problematic. And it's very, like I said, it's very Alinskyite. It's, so I don't, when I hear them come out when they're attacked by the left and complain about the cancel culture, Michelle and I are going to go, well, then you need to stop it too, because you're really causing a problem. And I'm not even as concerned about it causing divisions among conservatives. There will always be divisions as far as disagreements, as there should be. The day that the conservative movement is a monolithic one voice is the day that we're not thinking for ourselves, and the day that we have some kind of tyrannical control over us. And I don't want it. What I want is to be able to speak freely within the conservative movement without being deplatformed and silenced and stigmatized and basically treated like you're a piece of crap and you have no reason to speak. So this is the problem with the whole cancel thing is that it's not so much the division that it's causing on the right, fundamentally just as far as disagreement goes and lack of unity. It's that it empowers the very people who are trying to destroy the right. And that's my concern about it. It's not, oh, you guys are you're not being unified. I'm gonna screw that. I mean, we're not always unified, and that's fine. We haven't been unified about abortion forever. We're not unified about what role government should play in certain issues. We're not unified about even sexuality issues. But we can still be unified on some of the big things. We can still have those voices speaking and continue to speak and stand for conservative principles in that. But when you start deplatforming your own, you are empowering a leftist machine that is going to destroy you. And, so people need to be aware about how serious this is. This isn't just Michelle getting mad or me getting mad or anyone being bitter or anything like that. It's a real danger because what you got to understand is that the leftist strategy to deplatform and to silence is to get one of their strategies is to get us to do it ourselves. That's what they want. Not only that they do it, they want you to do it to yourself. It's like, they want you to become the snitches. They want you to turn on your own. I mean, this is what makes it really effective, is not only when they're doing it, but when you're doing it to each other. And so it's dangerous stuff, and it needs to stop.
So financial consideration couched and presented as virtue and principle, is that how you would sum it up? Basically, it's just, I mean, you would think a guy like Ben Shapiro would understand, never kneel, never apologize, don't justify, stick up for your friends. Like, I mean, you would think a guy like that knows, and geez, for crying out loud, I don't know how many subscribers he's got. Gavin McInnes brags about 20,000. I know he's probably a fraction of what Shapiro and guys like Crowder does, and they're funded by their subscriptions. There's, probably 100,000 people paying Ben Shapiro $10 a month, aren't there?
No. He's mainly funded by investors. That's his major income. He's not just selling a product and he's worried about his customers. No, it's investors.
So that's why he's so conscious about the brand, quote unquote.
Oh yeah, you don't want to lose your big old investors. I mean, a lot of these websites, and some of them have lost investors, and they have to get loans, and then they do have to rely on public, the customer, basically
subscriptions.
But they're not. I mean, they get money from their subscriptions, and don't get me wrong, but no, it's their investors. It's the big money that's behind this stuff. That's who they don't want to. I mean, money is such a big part of this, and who the investors are and how they're accountable to the investors. And they're probably even concerned about losing subscribers as well. I mean, that's all part of it, but it comes down to money. And of course, one of them would probably say, well, I do have to take that into consideration. It's just part of it. It's just realistic. I just have to, because that's the way it is. Well, then you need to, that's where I'm like, well, we need to stop having so much power and money put into single platforms and think that they are so irreplaceable and so indispensable that they can cancel their own because it's so, they're too big to fail. And then, I mean, I think we're getting too much in the mindset of a lot of these media voices as being too big to fail. The minute we're there, the minute we've become enslaved to the pragmatism of being having to desert your own. And so we need to diversify the voices, diversify the money. I think a little bit more, diversify the power in the speaking, and instead of lifting up just a few and empowering them so much that they become desperate and say, no, I can't lose this. We can't lose that. So we'll do whatever we can and kill even our own side in order to stay speaking. It's kind of the mentality, even of support of Trump himself. Too big to fail. And I say that as a Trump supporter. I mean, it's just the attitude of it in the long term. We need to be careful and be cautious about that.
I guess they can even, fool the right. I mean, we've seen people like you, Michelle Malkin, have been brought into and done work for and spoken at events for Turning Point. I mean, for crying out loud, Ashley St. Clair, they tried to cancel as well. As far as, because she was seen in a picture with Nick Fuentes, I like Ashley. I think she's a strong voice. She's kind of a e-girl or whatever you call her, but she's got an influence. And I think she went into it with a good heart, and then a picture surfaces of her at a late night party with Nick Fuentes. I didn't even know who Nick Fuentes was at the time, and next thing you know, she's done. And she went out, she didn't say much about it, kind of, had some sort of class about it, but it seems like even the conservatives are fooled by these guys until push comes to shove, and then they bail on you, and then you find out exactly who they are, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a combination. It's not just, I do have to emphasize, this isn't just the money. The money is probably the biggest driving factor of the investors, but it's also just personal. It really is. It's like, I don't want to be associated with people who my friends don't like. I don't want to be associated that goes against that very millennial, libertarian, pseudo-conservative mindset. And that's the other thing I do want to point out. a lot of these people that we say are conservative are not really at the root conservative. They're libertarian conservative. They're a hybrid. And libertarianism, while I support libertarianism, love libertarianism as far as its small government mindset and freedom, is not conservatism, principally. And it can cause some real problems. And libertarians are real wimps when it comes up to standing up to social issues and standing up to things that get you canceled by the PC culture.
Where do you think their differences are mostly
they're
when it comes to
terrified of being called racist and bigots and misogynists. They're terrified. They don't like it because they want to be the tolerant ones. You know, free will, everyone do what you want. No, I don't care what you do. That's what the libertarians really like. They like to be like, you know, anyone can do anything, just don't take my stuff. And, you know, so I agree with them as far as government control. You know, everyone should be able to do anything and don't take your stuff as far as the government goes. But that's not how the civil society functions. And so there's a conflict there within conservatism between this libertarian element and conservatism when it's applied to the civil society, not when it's applied to government policy and stuff.
Who stood beside you no matter what? We talked about Michelle Malkin, you know, some other characters like, you know, Alex Jones and Milo and Gavin McInnes for that matter.
I don't know about Alex and Gavin. I don't know who all spoke. The only people I heard that spoke out for me was Milo, which was interesting because he's gay. You know, he came out and go, "This is ridiculous."
Well, he's not a huge fan of Mazza. Was it Mazza, Carlo Mazza, that you were trashing, or you don't want to hit that?
And so Milo did. You know, Michelle's been supportive. No one. There was no one. All the big names ran away or didn't say anything, or behind the scenes applauded my counseling. I'm trying to think. Dinesh D'Souza's been, you know, supportive of me, and some people at Blaze TV, but not Glenn Beck. He hasn't been. Mm-hmm. No, they all ran for like rats off the sinking ship. I mean, no, they would not have anything to do with me, and either blatantly called for my deplatforming, applauded the deplatforming, or were silent about the deplatforming. Or or behind the scenes were supportive.
Yeah, I feel your pain more than a little because, and I was just saying in an interview the other day, when I was on the left, I had the respect of the right, and of course the left loved me because I was their candidate, for lack of a better term. It was a political candidate, and I do all right on stage and behind the lectern. I was usually more knowledgeable on the issues than any other candidate because a lot of these candidates that I was running against were first-time just parachute candidates. And the conservatives, I remember one of the conservative boss coming up to my mother at one of the debates. My mother didn't like going to the debate. She was only there just to support me. But he came up and he said, "Hey, psst, Claudia, hey, don't tell anyone, but I'm going to vote for this kid because he's the best guy on the stage." He's, you know, and first past the post in Canada. I mean, you can win your riding with 35% of the vote. It's just the way it goes with so many parties. But I had the respect of the right. I remember guys like Rick Dykstra, a political science major, and it's like, "Jimmy, I wrote my thesis on proportional representation. I got you, man." I can't, you know, he wasn't supportive of it because he was a conservative, and that's not their platform. But I had the respect of the right. And, of course, I was the darling of the left because I was their candidate. And then over the last 5 years, this painful process of eating this shitty-tasting red pill, and, you know, as Shapiro and McInnes and Peterson and Crowder, and it was a slow movement to what I call center-right. I consider myself a moderate because I still, you know, I think I'm in the fat part of the bell curve with 95% of us that aren't on the extremes. And I have more hate from the right, from the left now, than I've ever experienced. Lifetime high school friends or lifetime friends that I've grown up with since I was 5, saying things like, "Oh, you used to be so intelligent and funny and witty. What happened to you?" Well, my politics changed. And, you know, I got myself in a little trouble. I called a left-wing radical feminist politician, a regional politician here in my town, some pretty unkind words. And it was a little bit of a rant, you know. The media came for me. And I said, like, listen, I don't take anything back. We're talking about, well, she had a habit of tweeting out Jesus fucking Christ, and I'm just like, you're an atheist. That's offensive not to me as a Christian, but to all people of faith. And then I went on, and I was very loose on my broadcast that day. And the media calls and says, hey, I want to talk to you about your video. I'm like, what video? I've got lots of videos. Oh, the one about so-and-so. I'm like, dude, this is news? Not only was it news, it was headline news in my town. It was, my region's about 500,000. We're on the south shore of Lake Ontario, about an hour away from Toronto, near Niagara Falls. So Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, Fort Erie, Grimsby, that's all the Niagara region. And not only did they run the story with the offensive word, well, it was totally out of context, they included the link to my broadcast, which if it's hate speech and so offensive, why are you promoting it in the article? Of course, then the left came for the editors and said, why are you putting it in the article? So then the editors took it out of the article. Like, it's just unbelievable. I took 5 straight weeks of just straight hate mail. And I mean, some of it was pretty comical but I look at people like you, and I had a loose moment, and I was having some fun, like crying out loud. I can't even watch CNN anymore because it's fake news, but they're just they're just so down on everything. At least Fox still has some fun, and I know you're turned off by the whole network thing, but it made me wonder. I would apologize to the person I was talking to, because we were friends. I went back in my text message and I'm like, oh, geez. It goes back to 2014. I'm your biggest fan. Very affectionate messages going back and forth, because not only did we work on campaigns, we worked on anti-campaigns to make sure people didn't get elected. And there was only one thing that changed for me and the girl I was talking about, and it was my politics. Suddenly, late-term abortion is offensive to me. Suddenly, I've got a deeper faith in my God than I used to have, and so that affects my politics. But there was only one thing that changed. I didn't become any less funny or intelligent or witty. It was just my politics. And all of the left, friends that I've had forever are like, we're done. And I think it's funny. Hey, unfriend me on Facebook. I won't find out for weeks, months, maybe never. You don't have to do me a Dear John letter of 4 paragraphs on the way out that everyone could read. I leave them up there. I don't edit anything, but I just find, it just finally occurred to me. See, when I was a left, I had the respect of the right, and when I went to the right, I lost all the respect of the left. And I think this just goes to ideological possession. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the big problems that we're facing today, and people don't need to think about the philosophical undercurrents that are happening that's causing all of this polarization. And it's not just a political thing. The political thing is at the downstream of it all. The root of this is an abandonment of the common ties of common principles and objective truth that make freedom work. Wow. And that make cooperation and make an understanding of people with differences work. When you have an objective truth, when you agree, for example, that A is true, that there is a trueness there about something, then you're more able to then disagree and go, well, you're not getting to the objective A. And they're like, well, you're not getting to the objective A. But you're agreeing that the objective A is outside of both of you, that it's an aim for you to attain to. When we have rejected objective truth, and now we have a tyranny of subjectivism, our individual truth is what's true. My truth is true, your truth is true, his truth is true. We have 5 billion truths. When you have that, you have no common ties in which to bind you. But you need to work together, right? You live in society. You need to make things happen. You have policies to put in place. You have things that you disagree with in your own subjective truth that you want done. If I think that there's racial injustice, that's my subjective truth, and I want to make sure something happens about it. So what happens is that instead of everyone trying to find out outside of themselves what's true, You rally around those who agree with your own subjective truth in order to empower your own platform, your own purpose, yourself. So that forms groups. And the groups are purely ideological and purely subjective and reductionistic views of truth around a certain issue or a certain thing. And so if you deviate even remotely from whatever that group agreed subjective truth is, you're out. So there is no commonality. There's always polarization, and the groups get smaller and smaller and smaller, more tribalistic and more divisive. So because we're diverse human beings, because none of us are the same, we have to have some common objective ties to tie us together. When those fray, then these individual diversities become all-encompassing to us. And the internet doesn't help, because then we're able to find and gravitate toward the person who goes, well, you agree with that. So let me just use our side. We have Trump supporters. And so, well, no, I'm going to do the left. It's easier. I hate Trump. Therefore, I'm going to gravitate to anyone who loves Biden or who loves the Democratic Party. That I think it's what I feel, what I see, what my agendas are what are most important and true. And so I'm going to try to surround myself with the people who are just that way. And any deviation from it is seen as a personal betrayal, because again, it's personalized. It's the subjectivism that's just riddled in everything that we're doing. And it pushes us further and further away from one another, further and further into identity groups. And then that's why a PC identity wars are so effective. When you have pushed people into identity groups or ideological groups, then it's easier to take them out if you can delegitimize the group. So if you delegitimize the group, and you can stigmatize them and silence them just on one issue or one thing or one association. So this is why you become almost a little, no matter whether you're on the right or left, if you're caught up in this kind of mindset, which most of us in this country are today, even on the right, you're terrified by anyone in the group who might betray the group. So you're afraid of associations. You're afraid of how other people see you, because you don't want your group delegitimized. You don't want your group, you don't want you to be silenced. You want to maintain power. And so this kind of philosophy and abandonment of objective truth and has really fed the tribalism that we see today. And it's pushing us further and further into reductionist groups. It's ultimately dehumanizing. It empowers totalitarianism, because that's what totalitarian wants. It wants us separated to the point that individuals are separated so that they can, oddly enough, be herded into one big controlled group that's protected by the most powerful. These movements are very dangerous. They're deep thoughts and things that people don't often think about, and they don't see what's happening. And that's why people like Michelle and I warn against this kind of group dynamics that we have going on, and quest for power, whether it's on the right or the left.
I should have written it down. What did you say? Tyrannical or tyranny of what? When you just started out, that
it's the tyranny of subjectivism.
Yeah, wow, that's what says a lot right there.
I mean, that is what we're living in, and it's not a left or right thing. We need to get past that. It's not a political thing. It's not a left or right thing. It's the ethos of our age. It's the zeitgeist in which we live in. We are already there. It's not even something
that just throws facts completely out the window, so that this is the tyranny of subjectivism is what you would call my truth, right? This is like, oh, well, my truth. No, there is truth. Your truth is bullshit.
Yeah, there is truth. And it's not just scientific fact. There's logical truth. There's philosophical truth. There's moral truth. So, but we have reduced everything down to not only, it started by being only scientific truth, mechanistic truth, materialism, what led to this subjectivism, where we cut everything down and reduced everything down to this materialistic reality, and cut ourselves off from the soul of ourselves. And we cut off moral truth and logical truth and philosophical truth, existential truth, about ontological truth, to use another word. And so now we just have been reduced now to this just subjectivism. And, but yet, so we're like, well, that's my truth. And so obviously I don't live on an island to myself where I can just go around going, my truth, my truth, my truth, and I'm happy in it. I live in society. So I need to find other people who, at least on one point, agree with my truth. And so I form that group, and the bigger that group is, or the louder that group is, it doesn't necessarily number-wise have to be big. When that group gains power in some way, that's very empowering to the individual. We want to feel empowered. We want to feel accepted. It's natural for us to want to be part of the group. And we get to become terrified at being cast out from the group or having our group delegitimized. So, but that's just on that very point that you're attacked by others. So you're in one group that's standing for, I don't know, abortion, whatever, standing for pro-life. If you can be labeled racist, then you are delegitimized in a PC culture. You could be, let's say you're pro-homeschool. Well, if you can be labeled homophobic, then you're delegitimized. If you're a church that stands for traditional marriage, you're labeled, which is an objective truth. You're labeled homophobic and delegitimized. And if there's people within that group of your church who are so hung up and terrified about being labeled, they will abandon you and not want to associate with you anymore, no matter how much they may agree with you on other points. It doesn't matter. It's whatever empowers the other side, the other groups, to take you out. And again, this happens on the left and right. That's why we see this on the left and right, because it really goes beyond ideology. It goes beyond politics. It's about human existence. It's about, it's about truth. It's about how we live our lives. And we've abandoned it. And the trajectory is not good. There's no fixing this. Only, some horrible catastrophic event that's going to bring us back to reality.
I'm glad you said that. I fantasize about this often. Like when, there's no racism unless you're talking about the human race. There's just, obviously there's racism, but I mean, we don't live in a racist society. We don't live in a rape culture society. We don't tolerate rape and all this kind of stuff. And I think the narrative's been sold for so long, but I want to keep you on time. Just on the way out, what do you think a few topics are that we need to discuss better? Either we're not having the debate on that are important to move us forward, because you're right that, I don't know, the objective truth seems to be evading so many, especially on the left right now, and maybe even some on the right. But what do you think some of the topics are that we're not discussing properly or need to learn how to flesh out better to make evolution happen, together? I mean, and I missed my point about fantasizing. This idea that if an alien force comes down and threatens the whole human race, do you think that would actually unify us, left, right, gay, straight, whatever, for the first time? No? No,
not immediately. No, it wouldn't become until there's decimation.
Right, because
it sounds so bleak,
otherwise we would have saw it under this COVID thing,
yes,
because everything's politics.
Yeah, no, it actually.
So the aliens come down on the left and right going, oh no, we want to, they're our friends, and then the right is like, no, we want to kill those guys.
Or how do you fight it? I think the fundamental problem in our society, and I don't know how to get back to it. Well, I don't think you can until you have a whole new generation that's been re-educated, is this understanding of truth. I think without an objective understanding of who we are as human beings, as created by God, understanding truth as God has stated it, not just in a scripture, but in natural revelation and logic and reason, all of it together, until we return to that as the foundation of everything else, our bleating about politics and even our cultural whining will not amount to anything. When you have totally abandoned the very foundation of the civil society that holds together civil society, that allows freedom, then you will not have your country as it had. And when de Tocqueville came to America back, and he wrote Democracy in America, he looked at this American experiment of freedom and liberty, and he said, what are the things that really are foundational for keeping this together? One was a proper understanding of the balance of equality and liberty. And he said, if equality and the desire for equality of outcomes, which is a lie and based on subjectivism, becomes the goal, you will lose liberty. You will lose your society, you lose the republic. If you abandon the religious foundations that undergird society, you will lose it. He was talking about the different obstacles to keeping our society from being, destroyed. And religious foundation was one, an understanding of liberty and equality and balance, mutual affection and respect for each other in the family and the home, especially men and women, as being foundational. When those three things are foundational to liberty. And if you don't have it in the civil society, you will lose it. And interestingly enough, we have I call them the triumvirate of evil in our society today. Feminism, reverse racism seen in Black Lives Matter, and the LGBT agenda, all attack in their own different ways with overlap each one of those things.
Religion,
Feminism
traditional family.
The family and the affections and the trust between men and women, which is foundational to society. Black Lives Matter attacks the understanding of liberty as opposed to equality of outcomes. LGBT is really on a collision course with religious liberty and the religious foundations about human identity and human sexuality, which is foundational. So these three, the more they're empowered, and they're empowered by the whole PC mindset and a whole view of that tyranny of subjectivism. Each one of them is. And until we see that, and until we return to truth that undermines the ideologies behind those movements, we will not have our freedom.
I agree with you. You can't cut the foundations of a successful society over a millennia without it just collapsing like a house of cards. I hope it doesn't have to collapse completely to be rebuilt, in this. It's kind of like the left wants to tear all the systems down because they're all corrupt and rebuild them in this vision of utopia perfection. I hope it doesn't come to that, but you mentioned Foucault. Jordan Peterson quotes. Who's this guy he quotes all the time? That lamented about the killing of God. He wasn't celebrating that.
You're talking about Nietzsche?
Yeah, Nietzsche. Yeah, and this idea that you can cut the foundations out of society, the family. Well, I think fatherlessness is one of the deepest root causes of many of the issues we face today, but maybe a lot of it does go back to our spiritual beliefs and our beliefs in, like Western civilization was founded on Christianity. And now, God's been dead for a long time, quote unquote. And
where does the objective value of fatherhood come from? I mean, that's an objective truth and objective value that has been rejected.
Just like the laws that are in the books today come from the fact that every human being was created in the image of God type of thing. And this is where our value comes from. That's why there's laws to protect that kind of thing. And so if you kill that support, then you're going to have nothing but a collapse.
Well, we don't have an understanding of our own identity. And again, that's where subjectivism reigns. When you embrace subjectivism, you actually destroy yourself because you don't understand who you are objectively speaking. And we don't really understand our identity as human beings. We don't understand our identity as sexual creatures. We don't really understand our identity in our place in this world, objectively speaking. What is our purpose? What is our purpose objectively as human beings, as men and women? What does that mean? Not all of that is gone. You don't even hear that kind of conversation about identity. I mean, America is truly having an identity crisis, but it's not an American identity crisis. It's a human identity crisis. We don't even understand what it means to be male anymore. We don't understand sexual identity. And instead, we have just set up whatever our ideas about ourselves, our own individual unique, which is value, but our own individual selves or our own individual views about something, we set those things up as our identity. I'm Black, that's my identity. I'm gay, that's my identity. I'm from North Carolina, that's my identity. I'm from New York, that's my identity. I'm part of this, PETA, that's my identity. And so if this is one of the problems also that feeds the cancel culture. If you don't agree with that, if you disagree with someone on that point, you're not just disagreeing with them about some objective discussion.
You're attacking
their very identity.
Right.
And they can't have that. You don't want to be attacked. You don't want yourself to be erased by someone else's criticism. So I can't just say, hey, I disagree with you about feministic views on something. No, if I do that, then I'm attacking a woman's identity, because that's what she's made it to be. So everyone's reduced themselves and their whole identity down to whatever their personal quirks are, whatever their individual truth is. And it is causing division and conflict, instead of pulling back and saying, what is my design? What is my truth as a human being? And we'll find that when we do that, we have a whole lot in common with each other. And, but we haven't done that. We don't see each other as human identity. Women don't see themselves as unique in their sexuality, and men. And so instead, it all becomes more and more reduced and more divisive.
I appreciate your time. What's coming up for you, and how can people get a hold of you just on the way out?
I am, like I said, I'm publishing at Romans 1, starting my podcast, and working on another book. I'm still selling my book, What Men Want to Say to Women That Can't, which I think people would really like. I talk about human identity there. I talk about male identities, male sexuality, and our need for masculinity. And I talk a lot about objective truth in that, related to fatherlessness and related to sexual relationships between men and women, and how important it is, and men and women in the workplace, and this whole idea of equality of outcomes coming from the feminist side, and how wrong that is and divisive it is. So that book has a lot in it about a lot of things that we've discussed.
You really threw me with the "I'm voting for Biden because" hashtag. I'm like, what? This has got? No, hang on, she hasn't gone that far.
No, politically, I have clarity. I may disagree with people on my side, but politically, I know who I'm voting for, and it definitely will be Trump.
Yeah. Okay. God bless you. Thanks for the time, Denise. I really appreciate your generosity there, and be well. And I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let me see if I can do this. There she is. There she was, gone. Okay. Denise McAllister, if you need her. Here she is on Twitter. At McAllister Den. Decent conversation. I like Denise McAllister's takes, and man, she's strong. Strong interview. Appreciate it. Anyways, that's it for me. I'm getting out of here. Things to do, people see. Peace, love, and